Welcome to Mastering the Moment, a series of 10-minute self-improvement podcast recordings to provide some actionable insights to respond to life's challenges. My name is Heidi Edick. I'm a coach, trainer, and consultant here at Dew Point International in Hong Kong. Our podcast today is about how our reactions affect our communication. It's no secret that we get emotional when we react. It's these internal reactions inside of our heads. And in this podcast, we're going to explore how do we know what's going on when we are reacting? How do we manage that reaction? And how can we choose a better way of communicating in the face of those reactions? So what's going on when we react? The reaction depends on the amount of stress that we can manage, and this varies person to person. For some people, stress is a motivation, but everybody has their threshold, how much they can take. And when that threshold is exceeded, our fight or flight responses are triggered. We start to move away from the threat of that stress. And when that happens, we tend to avoid communication, we avoid interacting with other people, we withdraw, and that just limits our alternatives for working out how to solve the problem. So why do we sometimes react stronger than other times? Well, like I said, it depends on the amount of stress variables we may be encountering. It could be an accumulation of pressure. There's some well-being factors that we may need to consider, like how well are we taking care of ourselves? Have we eaten enough? Have we slept enough? Some people thrive on being busy, but there could be points where that busyness can be overwhelming. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So what's the difference? It could depend on physical, mental, emotional pressure. The point is we need to uncover what is the trigger? What's triggering us to react? It could be things that are happening in our environment or things we're worrying about on a global scale. Or it could be personal. It could be unfulfilled hidden desires that lead our reactions to become out of control. And when those emotions get out of control, again, we can shy away from our communication, whether it's verbal or nonverbal. So shying away, let me share an example of a client that I worked with who was suppressing her feelings of frustration because she hadn't been able to take leave to go home. And due to the work schedule, they were opening a new product line. She didn't feel comfortable speaking to her boss because she'd witnessed that her boss reacted when other people had asked for leave. And so she avoided that conversation. Let's look at another example. It's another client. It was a leader who communicated pretty effectively, actually. He was a very successful leader. His boss thought that he needed to keep his meetings under control. I think what happened was that when he got involved with these board meetings and agenda items were incomplete, then he kind of lost control of his emotions. So through the coaching, we explored what was going on, why in this circumstance in particular, his reaction affected his communication, why in all other situations, he was able to keep his poise, keep his control, but only in these board meetings, he had a problem. What we discovered was that there was a person who he respected, he valued, who participated in these meetings. But this person would often kind of derail the agenda. They would get off the topic. They would tend to play devil's advocate in the meeting. And that sort of created a lot of disruption to whatever they had planned to discuss. And that triggered a feeling of being overwhelmed in this leader. The other thing that he discovered was that Perhaps he wasn't as prepared as he thought he was. And he realized that maybe if he had a stronger presentation, he could drive the focus of the discussion a little bit more. What he uncovered was that when he was overwhelmed in that situation, because the stakes were high, because he needed approval from these meetings, his work was contingent on this. He would put a lot of pressure on himself, and that was a trigger for losing his control of his emotions, and that affected his communication. So, what else would trigger our reactions? Sometimes it's our attitude that we develop or a mindset that we might be holding that is affecting our communication. For example, we use email a lot in the workplace. And with emails, we don't always have the full picture. We don't really know what the other person is thinking, what was their tone. We may misread the situation. We may even kind of expect the worst when we're opening our emails. I have a personal example of this. Recently, I was organizing an event. I was getting used to receiving rejections. I had quite a few rejections to joining that event. And one day I received an email from another good client of mine. I just kind of expected it to be a rejection again. I misread the email. And later on, when I looked back at that email, I realized, oh, wait, he actually accepted. I had gone in with this attitude or mindset that, oh, this isn't going to work. The event's not going to happen. And I was expecting the worst before I even opened the email. Really didn't read it clearly enough. So when we go in with a negative belief or attitude or mindset, that really shapes how we see communication. Let me share another story of another client who was dealing with misunderstanding emails. She was in a situation where she had to manage her team remotely, and because she couldn't have daily verbal communication with them, she would send her instructions via email. The response that she got back was an email with lots of questions, and her reaction was, they're not listening to me. They're challenging my authority. She had this mindset of, it's so difficult to motivate these people. She even shared those emails with me to ask me to look at them and see, they're challenging my authority. Now, to be honest, when I read through it, I wasn't really seeing the same thing as she did. What I saw were questions that needed to be clarified. So I shared that with her, and we discussed that maybe the next step would be to get on a call together with them and clarify what was it they're looking for. Answer those questions verbally rather than through email. And that would give her a chance to build up the buy-in if there was a problem accepting her idea. So she got on to the call with the team, and sure enough, they just needed clarification. In fact, their questions were because they lacked the confidence to follow through on her instruction. They didn't really know how to handle things after they followed her instruction. They didn't have the experience, and what they really needed was more support and more training. She realized that, yes, perhaps communicating through email wasn't quite the right way to go about it, that maybe there needed to be a little bit more discussion with the team, especially with something new where they needed more help. So we explored this reaction a little bit further. And what she came to realize is that because of her own boss's management style, he would tend to quickly contact her via WhatsApp or call her whenever he read emails and start sort of questioning, like, what's wrong with the team? And so that sort of got into her head. Oh, there's something wrong with my team. They're not very well motivated. So she started getting influenced by that. To protect the team, she would tend to reply to emails very, very quickly, very short answers, a very instantaneous response. That was also becoming quite overwhelming for her because it wasn't the way that she wanted to communicate. She was communicating reactively. So what she worked out as a way to deal with the situation was to give herself some space. She needed to think a little bit more before she responded. So she would try to give herself a little bit more space. Sometimes she still drafted an email to reply, but instead of clicking send, she kept it in the draft folder. So that way she could take a break and do other things and then come back and look at it again, edit herself if she felt that it wasn't clear enough or she was reacting emotionally to the communication. And what she found is that sometimes she didn't even need to send the email because other people had stepped in, resolved the issues. So by controlling her reactions, she was able to communicate better with the team and improve her relationship. So in summary, how can we choose a better way to communicate in the face of those reactions? Well, as we learned in this podcast, first, become aware of your own emotions, your own reactions. Recognize your triggers. What is causing you to go into that threat state or that fight or flight mode? What is going out of your threshold? Recognize when you don't have full control of your communication. It helps to take some time out, whether it's to let yourself calm down, let your emotions simmer down, or just to clear your head so that you can take a second look at how you're communicating. So choose not to communicate so quickly or directly or forcefully. Instead, take more pause, listen more, reflect more, and ask questions. Ask questions that lead the other person to explain or prompt the other person to think. So that was our episode on how our reactions affect our communication. Stay tuned to our next episode in our Mastering the Moment series on recognizing development needs. And if you have a story or a case to share, or if you have any questions, feel free to contact me.